I get home from work and do long hours, but when I walk through the door, no one can even be bothered to look away from their devices to greet me.
If a fight needs to happen to get the conversation started, it shouldn't be like, oh, we're going to fight, so I won't bring it up.
Yeah, that shouldn't be why you avoid the conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Hello.
And welcome. We embrace you here. We embrace you in this podcast.
I was expecting you to say something inappropriate, so
I was distracted.
Good. Nailed it. Welcome back to Honey, We Need a Chat. If you've been following closely, you may or may not have noticed that our episodes have been all out of whack this season. Since starting season 2, our episode order has been out the wazoo. So you had 2 chit chats in a row, and now we're doing a Reddit story. We will get it together, but if we don't do it this way, you're not going to get any of us. So we just had to hit the ground running and make it work.
That's all right. We got it. We're getting there.
We are getting there. In saying that, today is our very first Reddit story episode for season 2, which is exciting. For a short time there, I forgot that we did Reddit stories for a short time there. Hence, this is happening now. We've been talking in the last few episodes, if you haven't yet caught up on them, about emotional load, and that follows very closely on from mental load, which we spoke about last season as well. Definitely highly recommend checking out those episodes because these are invisible challenges that relationships navigate and invisible dynamics that you might not even be aware of in your own relationship. So we're going to dive into some Reddit stories that cover these topics, and so we can kind of practically work these out in real life stories written in by real life people.
That's great. And this is good too because again, it's just other stories than just ours.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice yeah.
And these things work out in different ways for everybody. So yeah, it's nice to see. It's not nice because a lot of the time they're not nice stories, but it's helpful to see it playing out differently. So without further ado, shall we dive right in?
Honey, we need to chat.
This story is called, How Do You Deal with Feeling Underappreciated at Home? 36 married, full-time job, wife has a part-time job, and 2 kids who are both below teenagers. Now, this has been getting to me a lot lately. It's been building for months since before Christmas, and I'm feeling at a breaking point and don't want to lose it in an angry outburst at home. I've just been walking outside to check something every time I feel about to lose it. For context, I work in a labor-intensive job and am one of the leaders in our workshop. A bit of a go-to for all apprentices and young trades. Even management will come to me with problems to sort out for them. At work, I feel very appreciated for my hard work and problem solving, always getting accolades and praise at the team meetings. I get home from work and do long hours, but when I walk through the door, no one can even be bothered to look away from their devices to greet me. The house is normally half a mess, the bin is overflowing, and all the little things aren't done. So I will normally put my shoes on and ask if anyone wants to come for a walk with me. I'm working on my personal health and fitness, and no one ever does. Every morning from work, I send my wife a good morning text to ask how she slept and how the kids are. I'm always the first one to do this. Not once has she texted me first. So I've stopped doing that, and suddenly I'm distant to her. She can't even be bothered to be intimate either. I rarely see my mates anymore, as I'm either always working or taking the kids to sports, etc. Lately, I feel like I'm just the provider going through the motions of everyday life. I feel like a zombie on repeat and just emotionally numb. I feel more appreciated at work and that I'm more valuable there. I know I should talk to her about this, but whenever I do raise concerns or bring up how I'm feeling, it just gets turned back on me. Any advice on how to raise these concerns without it becoming a fight? I'm sure there are plenty of others going through the same thing.
First of all, like how he's saying there at the end there, is there any way of discussing this for it to not be in a fight? I think that's a good question, but at the end of the day, if a fight needs to happen to get the conversation started, it shouldn't be like, oh, we're going to fight, so I won't bring it up.
Yeah, that shouldn't be why you avoid the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And again, he's asking if there's a way to bring it up so it doesn't end up like that, which is great. But at the same time, it's worse to not fight and leave these things unsaid.
100%. Yeah.
There's a way of fighting well too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think a lot of people are scared of fighting. And I've heard it said in the past, like, we don't even fight. Like, that's a great thing in the relationship. And I understand the sentiment behind it, but I do think that that's sometimes overlooks some of the other issues going on.
Yeah. And we've said too, though, like, if this isn't now an excuse to just go ham on each other,
Mm.
right? And just be like,
Well, then we're going
"Rah."
to fight.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, no, there's a way, like, it's important to be intentional about the way that you approach it. But if you're not going to approach it because there's a risk of fight, then that's a big issue too.
Mhm.
So it's that balance between
Yeah.
the two.
I think as well, something that comes to mind when I'm reading this is it makes like what he's describing sounds really hard. And I can understand how it would feel really discouraging. But I also wonder what it is that's sitting behind these attitudes, because I don't think a family gets to the point where they don't spend any time together for no reason. I think there's habits, or there's a culture, or there's things that are going wrong or whatever that lead you to that point. And yes, I think when you've got like kids, you can't really control. You can show them the culture you want in your family and bring them up in that way. But I also am aware that our kids are nowhere near teenagers.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's going to be attitudes that we're just like, how did this come in? So I think that's probably separate, but more focusing on what he's described between him and his wife. I wonder what else is going on. What else is he seeking? Is he seeking just to be appreciated, but maybe missing some parts that are really empty, and they haven't been worked on. There's no intentionality. And so I think the conversation needs to happen. And like you said, that fight may need to happen. I think I would be very surprised if out of the blue, there's nothing else at play here at all.
Well, he says in his story, like in his writing, that he feels more value at work, right? Like, and I think that's a big key thing there. Like, he wants to feel valued at home. And, you know, we've spoken before about our intimacy struggles in the past, and about how, you know, there's those moments where you just don't feel wanted or desired, and that's just not a nice feeling at all. So he's saying about how his wife doesn't really want to be intimate, or is even interested in that. And it just sounds like he's just very lost within his own space. And I think that's a big thing too. Like, you have work, right? But then you have home, and home is supposed to be something, right? It's supposed to be more than just a place where you sit and sleep. It's like your family. Like, that's where, you know, trust is supposed to be. That's where comfort is supposed to be. That's where, like, my people are, right? That's what it's supposed to be like. But for a lot of people, it's not. So I completely understand that lost feeling in that. What do I fit? Like, am I even wanted here? Like, especially, you know, we are parents of young kids, right? Our kids love us. Like, they just adore us. And we've spoken about this before. There's going to be a time where they're like, ew, mum and dad.
Yeah.
You know, like,
we're not the cool ones.
We're not the cool ones anymore. We don't know everything. And they're already challenging us on what we know now anyway. But like, there's going to be that time in there. And that's going to be a really hard transition into that stage of, like, mum and dad, what are you here for?
Yeah, don't talk to me. I don't want to do things with you. I don't want to pay attention to you.
Yeah. Like, you know, they'll come home from high school and we'll be like, how's your day? They'll be like, fine. You know,
I mean, they already do that a little bit. Well, I don't like talking about one of our kids in particular, but yes.
Yeah.
It'll be a totally different attitude.
Yeah, exactly. Sure. Rather than, I don't want to talk about it. So you're like, oh, stop asking me about it.
Yeah.
But I don't know. But I can see how that would be very difficult experience.
I think having curiosity, like we say every time, curiosity about what's happening, how they've gotten to this point, what they need to do, is going to be the best way to have that conversation, rather than coming in and being like, I don't feel appreciated. You never do this. Because he also notes in here, I come home and the house is messy. And that's a factor to him coming home. Like, things haven't been done. The bin's overflowing, blah, blah, blah. She also works part-time. So.
I was going to say, like, is she working? Yeah.
So I think there's little, I think when you write a story and this is your context, how you're feeling in this space, it immediately triggers for me, what else is going on? And have you had that conversation? Like, have you explored why they don't want to go on walks with you? Have you explored why they're not being intimate anymore? And we've got an episode coming up, which is really, really good, with a person who has worked with couples, a couple actually, that have worked with couples in the intimacy space. And they talk a lot about, they call it the dead bedroom and what's going on there. And actually, Bryce mentioned the dead bedroom in his episode as well. It's not usually just that they've decided, I'm not interested. There's something else going on there. So be curious and open, and like, prepare yourself when you're going into that conversation that you might have to fight back some of that defensiveness so that you can hear and work on it and then come through the other side.
Yeah. And I saw something recently where it was talking about the difference between a supportive partner and a controlling partner. So in terms of, like, my partner wants to do this. I know it's not a good idea, so I'm going to influence that decision because I care for her, I want to protect her or them or whatever else, right? And that's more controlling, though, like controlling the outcome for them. But the supportive way is, okay, like getting beside and being like, well, you're a grown adult, you've got to figure out that, and I'm going to be here beside you as you figure that out. I love you, I care for you, but I can't control you. This is the question, right? Was what is the result that he's wanting? He's wanting things to change, and it's the way that we go about that change that could dictate the response. So for example, he could come into it as like, I want this change, and try and really control the situation, control the conversation with his wife to get a specific outcome. Or what it could look like is, well, have they been sitting down and talking about what do they want it to look like together? Is that, because that's less control and more getting together, teamwork and building and supporting, rather than dictating or complaining or whatever else. And like I said, they have their place, but what would be the best in this situation? It sounds like they're just disconnected in what their values are, what their goals are as a family or as a couple or whatever else. You just said then, with the interview coming up, intimacy, it's not that, because there's this thing guys talk about is about how they feel like women just lose sexual desire and stuff like that. And this interview is going to be talking about actually they don't.
They might lose interest in unfulfilling sexual intimacy.
Yeah. So there's a lot of different things that you can do that. And I think if this was us putting ourselves in the situation, what I would want to do is, again, go back to that. Well, what do we want the next 5 years to look like?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think as well, when you're in that transition stage with kids, it adds all these different layers. So if your kids are starting to be in this difficult, more disconnected realm, your potentially family dynamics, you just need to adjust, basically. You need to stay flexible and intentional the whole way through so that you come across these difficult times, and it's going to be difficult, but you're working on it together. Yeah. All right. So moving right along. Did I mess up by telling my husband that he didn't plan anything? My husband has a custody schedule where he has his youngest every single weekend, except for the summers. He and I talked about trying to take a weekend getaway since we only have limited time until we're back having his kid every weekend. Last week, my husband came to me and said he'd found a campground he wanted us to go to that weekend that was by the beach. He said he wanted to talk to me first before booking. I told him that sounded great and just asked for the website so I could see the place and what was nearby. The next morning, he sent me the website. It looked like a pretty awesome place. I was just trying to see what types of sites they had, but it looked like I could only see the sites when I put in the dates for availability. Turns out there was only one site available, which had a yurt that was out of our price range. I double-checked with my husband about booking, and he confirmed he hadn't booked anything. I told him what I found, and he suggested I look at other sites to see what was available by the beach. That made me pretty upset. I normally plan any type of alone time or date night. It was obvious he had just looked at a website and didn't do any of the work to book it. Once he told me to look around, I knew I'd rather stay home and work on a project I've been putting off. Earlier this week, we got into an argument, and my husband said he was not planning any of our getaways and only would for himself. I pointed out that he never actually planned anything at all. Did I mess up for saying that?
I don't think so.
You don't think she messed up?
I don't think she messed up. I think it's something that she's feeling, right? And I think she needs to be sharing that. Like, this sounds like a classic mental load
100%
sort of thing, right? And it's just understanding, it's him understanding that, but it's also her being able to share that in a constructive way, and again, going on that journey of understanding together is a big thing. I don't think she's messed up. I think it's really important to voice that to help see that other way. But if that's the end of the conversation, it's not messed up. It's just not constructive.
Yeah.
Like, now what? Like, okay, you've voiced it, but now what? Like, how does things change? How do things actually get better? It's a difference between voicing something and just getting something off your chest.
Yeah, I think this is a really classic story because it potentially from his end looks like I found the place, like I came up with the suggestion, and now you're getting upset at me because it's not available. That's nothing to do with me. So just look for other places. And that could look from his end, if he wasn't doing much thinking about it, that he had done his part, and why is she getting upset at him when he did his part? And almost like it's unfair for her to be upset at him when it's not available sort of thing. But it's such a classic story of, he said this would be great, and then she's just gone that extra step of being like, oh, is anything available on that weekend? No. And then all the mental load is now back on her.
Yeah.
And him to say, oh, just have a look at other places. Like I find booking things, I get super hyper fixated. We just did this recently I spent hours booking our anniversary getaway. So I like, that's fine. Like I enjoy that process, but it's also extremely stressful. And if there had been a time where you had been like, oh, we should do this thing, and then it's just left to me to figure it out, I think that would be really exhausting.
Yeah.
And it makes a lot of sense that it's frustrating.
Yeah, well, okay, let's just walk through this then. Okay, where is the mental load sort of come in, right? And you touch base on it briefly there, where it's like, so they're going to do a weekend away. That's the plan, is to do a weekend getaway. He's gone, ticked a box, and it's like, I found this place, but he hasn't looked into any other details. He hasn't looked into if it's available, right? He hasn't done that. And then it's like, again, box ticked, I've found a place, now dump it onto you. Now you have to go from here to either, and as she's now thinking through all that stuff, is it available? No, it's not. Cool. Now it's still back on her though. Like, and that's the mental load. It's like he's just like, yeah, again, like, oh, flick, I found that. Oh, what about this? And then just like dumped it off his mind and put it onto hers.
It's an interesting thing to think about as well. Some partners, the partner that carries the least mental load in this space, can sometimes just, it's like they don't even realize what goes into making something work. It's like, oh, this is the place we should go. And then they just assume that things will happen for it. It will just come together. And
maybe it's a pattern though. Maybe it has just come together because they, you know, she's been the one to fill that gap every time, right? So that's the thing, is now they're in this pattern. And that's where, yeah, again, like I think it's good that she said something, but you don't want to just not go on holidays now. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you want things to change. You want him to get a greater understanding of mental load and things as well.
They had an argument, and in the argument, he ended up saying he's never going to plan any getaways. He's only going to do it for himself. Like that's a really interesting conclusion to come to. So it obviously escalated.
I think that's quite an immature.
It's very petty
response.
It's very petty. It makes me wonder, how did this conversation go? What happened in the conversation? How did she come out of the gate? How did she explain it? Not in any way that she's responsible for his petty response. He's still responsible for that. I can't really like picture it being like, well, I'm never booking anything again. I mean, maybe if we were really frustrated, but it all is this big mix that plays into it. How do you approach it? What kind of, if this is a pattern, and yes, it looks logical, like it looks from an outsider's perspective, like he should probably realize there's more work that goes into it than just coming up with a website. But if it is a pattern, it's really hard to see outside of those things sometimes. So it's much better to approach it like, let's work on this. I want to make you aware of this thing that I'm noticing and this thing that I'm carrying. And let's work on making that like a balance for us a little bit more, rather than being like, you always do this. Like they actually, we talk about this a lot, may not be aware of the impact. Doesn't mean you're responsible for them. You have to still be able to make it clear to them, but they may not be aware of how deeply it's impacting you.
And again, like you might have the response of, well, they should be aware. Yeah, maybe. Like maybe they should be aware, but the fact is that they're not. So like, what are you going to do about it? You know what I mean? You can just fight about it and have this expectation, but at the end of the day, it's not going to change because you're not working on it together. It's just accusations, or it's just, you know, fighting. It's just, when it's just fighting is the issue. When there's no resolve, like that's, when you're in this sort of thick spot, difficult spot.
And once you've made them aware, they should be aware. Like once you've made them aware, they will still take time to learn things.
Exactly
everybody
right.
does.
Yeah.
But you should be aware.
We've now been talking about mental load for a while, and I'm still learning what that is, because it's changing habits. It's changing things that, you know, we've just done for ages, what I've done for ages, what I've seen done from other men, you know what I mean? Like it is changing. So, you know, just commit to that change as well. I think where it's an issue too is when you don't see any change, you know, like, and it's just like, keep on reminding, remember mental load? Like, oh yeah, cool. Oh, sorry, I'll take that back. You know, like, yeah.
Nailed it.
Oh,
all right,
so easy.
Let's move right along.
Hey guys, just a quick break before we dive into the next story. If you are loving these deep dives into real relationship struggles, we'd love for you to check out our Patreon community. Over there, we go even deeper, raw, unfiltered conversations, exclusive bonus episodes, and behind the scenes discussions that you won't hear anywhere else. So Amy and I even dig deeper into our stories and the things that we're going through as well. This week's Patreon episode is a heavy one. So come over, check it out, and join in on the community over there.
Alrighty. This one is called Why Is It So Hard for Men to Pay Attention to Details? It's a very inflammatory title.
Sorry, what did you say? Gosh, you're so good.
I was about to woman explain. What is it? Woman explain.
Mansplain?
Sit down.
Oh.
Mansplain to my man. I have a boyfriend and I really love him. We have been together for 2 years, live together, and things are mostly great. But I am just so tired of the fact that men just get to not notice things. He will clean, but only if I tell him. He will shop for dinner, but only if I tell him. He takes the trash, but only if I tell him. I feel lucky that he does these things when I tell him without complaining, but why do I even have to ask? If I talk to him about it, he says he just doesn't notice these things and that my standards for my home are just higher than his. The thing that really got me and that made me write this post is something that happened tonight. I was super late out the door and scrambling to find a belt, so I threw all my belts on my side of the bed and just ran out the door. He saw that I was late and helped me pack my headphones when I asked him to. He went to bed before I came home, so the bedroom was dark when I entered. Then tell me why I found all of the belts still on my side of the bed. I know they were mine, but would it have been so hard to move them to the floor before he fell asleep when he knew he would be asleep before I came home? I had to try to quietly put them down on the floor without waking him up. Had it been me, I would have thought about it just the same way I do all the little things for him to make his day better, like making sure his favorite water bottle is clean for work or putting a towel on his pillow if he's doing a late shower. I honestly don't think these things come from malice, and if I ask him about it tomorrow, he'll probably apologize, but then get right back to not seeing these things like this again afterwards. I complained to my therapist about this issue, and she said, well, he's a man, that's how they are. So why is that? Why is it so hard for them to just do things?
First of all,
I know what you're going to say.
First of all, I'm going to say no. Her man, he might be like that.
Oh,
for
I thought you were
starters.
going to say the therapist should never
Well, I
have
was
said
going to
that.
say that. Like, that's what I mean. That's what I'm actually talking to. Yeah, the therapist is like, men are like that. That is
That is
not
so,
true.
like, what therapist would actually say that?
Yeah, it's not true. Some men are like that. Some women are like that. You know, we hear those stories of either men or women struggling with those things. I think, a lot of gender roles in the past have been, very heavy on females doing that. But especially these days, man, like, oh, dude, like that offends me, that quote.
Get a new therapist.
Get
is
a
my
new
first
therapist.
suggestion.
Yeah. I think, first of all, there's quite a lot here. It seems like the belt thing is like the icing on the cake.
Yes.
It's not the thing that she's going through, because she's talking about she has to remind him this, remind him of that. The thing that I was thinking through she was talking, though, is like, I wonder what her love language is. I wonder if her love language is acts of service.
It sounds
because
like it.
we do what we receive, or what we want to receive. So if she's acts of service, like, it sounds like she's acts of service because she's doing all these extra things, right? So she's putting a towel on his pillow, like, that's awesome. That's really nice. But that would come naturally to her because that's what she seeks. That's what she craves. And that's also, if that's not getting filled, that's going to be,
she's
really fueling the struggle of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I agree. She seems like extra lengths, like putting a towel on a pillow. I don't think I've ever thought to do that for you. I get you your towel sometimes, but normally when you ask,
I have to ask you for it.
well, you should get a towel before you go in the shower. So.
Yeah.
But it does seem like she's extra alert to what needs he might have. And yes, I agree. I think it sounds like potentially a love language or how her family was when she was growing up or something like that she's got a little extra focus on. It is really frustrating. For one thing, I find it frustrating that he says, I just don't notice these things and your standards are too high. Not frustrating is probably a strong word. I think there's a really easy excuse to just be like, I just don't notice them, because you can brush, like, if you say, I don't notice them, sorry, I didn't notice them. There's no argument to that. Like, how can you just be like, well, notice them? Like, just like, how can you switch your brain to noticing? But you can. So she does. He doesn't need to do it at her level, but she notices these things. Other people notice these things. So you can notice these things, whether it's a natural instinct or not. If you're finding it's not a natural instinct, put things in place to remind you. So put reminders when the bin night is, or put a sticky note up somewhere that says, have you checked this or whatever? Because if it's a repetitive thing she's bringing up and you're just you're over and over saying, oh, sorry, I don't notice them, then that seems like you've lost that excuse now. That no longer is valid. And I do think a lot can be covered by saying things like that. People in the comments were like, well, maybe he didn't want to touch your stuff because he didn't want to mess up your things, which I understand that side of it as well. But I remember for a little while, you would get into the bed when we were sharing blankets. We don't do this anymore. And you would just put the blanket on you and it wouldn't be straight.
Yeah.
Like it'd be like all messed up and you were totally satisfied to just have this like bundled up blanket if it was covering you. And then I would get to bed and it wouldn't be like, I needed it to be straight. Plus it wouldn't be like even on us. So then I would like straighten it up and I'd just be like, can you just please do that? I didn't say. We had conversations about
we have
this.
had.
And you don't do that anymore. Plus we also don't share
blankets
anymore. So that might be why. Best decision we've ever made.
I still do it because I have it how I want it.
Yeah.
Like I have it half on me, half off me or.
So to me, when that was happening, it just looked like a really obvious, very minor example of you not thinking about me because you were like, oh, this works for my body. And then I would come to bed and it wasn't working for my body. So when we had that conversation, to me, which it wasn't your intention, but to me, it was saying, I'm comfortable and I'm ready for bed.
Yeah.
I think it is hard when you're in a relationship where you do a lot of invisible things for somebody and they don't. The other part is that if you're doing invisible things, they may not even notice you're doing them.
Yeah.
Which is really hard.
If they're invisible, they're invisible. Like you can't see them.
It's tough because as we've mentioned on here before, you're raised by your family and you're raised with your context. And a lot of the time, women from an earlier age are raised to notice how the household needs to run. That's just traditional old school ways that, like we've talked about, you see your parents do that. You see they saw their parents do that, blah, blah, blah. And on it goes. And so there are certain things that certain partners are going to be more aware of because of how they were raised, what they've been trained in, what they're used to thinking about and seeing. That doesn't excuse any partner from not being able to see those things. It does mean that there needs to be conversations around it. And then adding to that, the love language element, you need to have that conversation to make it clear what makes you feel loved. Maybe the next step is to say, I need you to put in place something to remember this, or in place something to be thinking more about these things and kind of take a little bit of that, break a little bit of that pattern, take a little bit of that ownership off of your lap. Anyway, she actually gives an update on this post and says, I talked to my boyfriend about it. He was very understanding, listened, and took it well. I hope that some things change because of this, but I am just super happy that we can talk about our issues in a constructive manner. Yeah. And that is great.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Just maybe move it from just a constructive conversation to practical outworkings or deciding on a step to take so that you can release a little bit of that mental load and he can put things in place to remind him. Right?
Bringing things up as well, just to just to end on this, is not an opportunity to vent. Like that's not what we want to do. We don't want to just come and vent and that's it. We want to work on stuff.
Do that. All right. Last story for this episode is Wife Does Not Contribute. That's the title. We have been married for a little over a year. We have been together for around 6 years. I love my wife. She is kind and generous, and I do not have regrets about marriage. We are both around 30 years old and have no kids. I make significantly more money. I pay all the bills and often need to help her pay her bills. I'm not bitter. I do not hold it above her, and I never make her feel guilty about it. My routine is generally I go to work early. I come home at lunch to take care of our dog. After work, I go to the grocery store and find something to make for dinner. I take the dog out for a walk and start chores. I put the clean dishes away, then start dinner. I try to have dinner ready by the time she comes home. After dinner, I load the dishwasher and put away leftovers while she goes straight to the couch to watch TV. I do a load of laundry or something productive like vacuum or clean the bathroom, and I shovel the driveway when it snows, mow the lawn in summer. If she doesn't need to get up in the morning, she'll sleep until noon or later. Our bedroom situation is dull. I'm lucky if we have intimacy once a week. I am just feeling drained. I tried to bring it up at dinner yesterday saying I would like more help around the house. She just stared at me like she didn't understand or didn't know how to respond. She does not handle criticism well. More than anything, I kind of need a vent. I'm open to any advice though. I just feel kind of used or taken for granted. I wish she would do more.
First of all, he's complaining that he gets it once a week.
I know.
Like so many people will be listening to that like, dude.
Yeah. I wonder if it's because they're kidless and have been only married for a year.
Oh, yeah, true.
But yes.
Yeah.
But, and just to be clear, and they'll talk about this in the episode coming up, the regularity is not the goal. Yeah. It's the quality and what works for you guys. So no one should hear an amount and then compare themselves and then figure out if you're healthy or not based off that, because it's about your relationship. But yes, obviously for him, something about that does not feel enough. And it's probably built on top of all the other things.
Again, like I think a lot of these are sort of feeding into each other where, you know, they've been married for a year and it's been that honeymoon period of the first year of marriage and stuff. It's like he's got these expectations, right? He's got these, like, has he voiced about that, you know, he wants to be up together before lunchtime, you know what I mean? Like, has he voiced these things in a constructive way? And have they set those goals together? We always talk about how, you know, we invest so much time in our careers. We invest so much time in growing in these things, vision casting for businesses and strategies and all this sort of stuff. And none of it towards our own relationships and our closest relationships.
Yeah.
And I think that's just really important, especially in your first like years of marriage, of, you know, you guys are learning each other. You're learning marriage, but like, do you know where you're going, right? And we also spend so much time in getting each other in the first place, like, you know, being in a relationship, like it's super intentional. Like for guys, like in girls, when we see someone we're interested in, we're very intentional, we're very caring, we listen more, you know, all these different things, because we want to get that person. And when we get them, it's like,
for some reason we let go. It's like,
it's like, all done, we made it. It's like, well, no, you've made it together, but what makes it the together great is the continual investment and the vision casting and the growing and the moving in a direction.
Yeah, I think that's really key. I was thinking about how at work you put processes in place for certain tasks. Like there's a process. If a workplace is working smoothly and growing and has a future, they have processes in place and they set those up based on what needs to be done, by when and who, like how to share the workload, and you adjust it as you go. And so this sounds like there is a process in place, and that process is that he does everything and she doesn't. And that is a lot, and definitely not a fair or equal delegation of those tasks. But a process needs to be put in place in order for it to work. Like you can't have one person doing all of those things and just looking at it like some kind of workplace. You just figure out a schedule. You figure out what needs to be done, whose responsibilities are where. He doesn't say if they both work full time. I think that they do, from what he implies. And so if they're both working full time, they both need to be sharing what's going on at home. Sit down and say, this isn't maintainable for me this way. So let's make a process that works for both of us. I don't know. Another thing that happens when you first get together is you come from different, as we've said, family cultures and experiences. So when we got together, you had been living out of home for basically 10 years already, on and off. And I had not lived out of home. I'd lived out of home when we got engaged. That was the first time that I had been living out of
overseas.
Home. Yeah, but I've been living in like a school. Like it was very different to living independently. And so there was things that I remember I think you had to teach me how to do laundry properly, kind of thing. Like there's stuff that I just didn't ever have to own properly for myself as an adult that you had experience in. So it was a process learning those things. And we definitely weren't even in terms of experience. And so this potentially is the same thing here. I don't know what her background is. Potentially he's had more experience being independent in terms of looking after his house and just existing as an adult, and potentially she hasn't. So there's all these different factors that play into these conversations. And as long as you're gentle and curious and focusing on it, like we both want to succeed, we want to be a team, we want to be stronger down the track, I think putting things in place to make it work best for you is a good constructive way of doing that, if you can gently ease into that.
And I think it's as well like really important to, again, ask the question, why? Why is she sleeping until noon? Why is she not helping around the house? And I think like, laziness might be it for sure. But if we look back, I think we've all got areas in our families where you don't really get taught how to do certain things, right? So whether it's laundry, it's like, it's a lot of things you think of like, well, you should be able to do that. Why can't you not do that? These guys are 30 now. Why is she still sleeping in until noon? Like that's crazy. In my head for a 30-year-old. But at the end of the day as well, like maybe she did come from a family where she didn't have to do anything, right? It's not her fault. Like it's no one's fault. It's just what the situation that she was in. It's like, cool. All right. Well, if I understand that, now this is bigger than just she's being lazy. It's like, actually, this is what she knows, right? So, okay. So first of all, we've got to now address that. Like, so just, you're a 30-year-old sleeping until lunchtime. Like maybe something needs to change here in a nice way, by the way. This is me being blunt. And then it's working through from there. So we could look at this as the exact same as the mental load sort of stuff as we mentioned before, where, you know, it's one thing to be aware of it, but then you've got to change there's so much effort to change that. You don't just split second, oh, I recognize mental load now I'm different. No, it's like through scenarios, through situations, it's like those triggers again, like, oh, I'm doing it again, aren't I? Because you're just so into auto tune, you're so into like, auto mode, like you've just been doing these things for years and years and years, and now you're learning it, you're processing it and everything else too. So
another thing I was thinking too is mental health plays into your proactiveness around the house a lot. And I don't know if there's anything going on there, but it's worth checking out when someone's lifestyle seems to be, it looks like they've given up. Sometimes that can be an indication that there's something going on with their mental health. And I was thinking, for me, like I had and do have this like deep shame when I feel like I'm not being effective around the house. And sometimes that can spiral into me just getting more and more like low and more less and less engaged around the house. And so if she is aware of what's going on and aware of how little she's playing into her house, she potentially is doubling down on that as a defense mechanism. That's why the curiosity is important, to come into the why, what's happening, how they're going, checking in on those things, and then putting something proactive in place that's small steps, easy steps, and clear to follow. Yeah. Alrighty. Well, that's Reddit stories on
that's it.
Mismatched. Nice. Yeah. So now we're going to go into the reality check corner.
Yeah.
So the reality check corner is our way of helping this episode not just be an episode you've listened to, but actually break through into your life if you choose to accept the challenge. There's some really easy, quick things you can do and implement and think about today, right now, later, whenever it pops into your head, to strengthen your relationship. So there's 3 different parts to it. The first one is a reflection prompt. And I just want you to think about this whenever you've got a second and just really take stock of where you're at in your relationship. Instead of focusing on what's missing, what is one way I can show up more intentionally in my relationship today? Am I bringing the energy, appreciation, and connection that I hope to receive? And a real focus for this is, we don't want it to be a reflection time where you're like, what is my partner not doing enough of? Because it's so easy to do that, to just be like, what's my partner failing at? Or what's my partner not doing enough of? Or in which way am I being victimized in my relationship? Like, in which way am I given the hard part? That's not the constructive way of navigating these things. And some people, like, relationships are so different, so we're not going to speak into that space. But if you can take a moment to reflect on your presence in your relationship, what you bring to your relationship, I think it's really constructive. So instead of focusing on what's missing, what's one way I can show up more intentionally in my relationship today? And am I bringing the energy, appreciation, and connection that I hope to receive? Second one is a challenge that you can do at any stage to connect with your partner. So for the next 24 hours, change one small habitual interaction with your partner. So if you usually walk in and wait for them to acknowledge you, be the first one to greet them warmly. Or if conversations are mostly around logistics, ask a deeper question and have like a deep conversation. Or if affection has been lacking, initiate a moment of physical touch. Shift the pattern and see what happens. So something that you've found yourself in a habit of doing, whether it's positive or not, but just in a habit of doing, shift it up for the next 24 hours and see what changes there. And this last one is the future pacing exercise, where we just really, really visualize a future that is constructive, and we borrow the feelings that we feel when we're visualizing that, the details we can notice and observe, and we borrow that to help us today in terms of putting things in place to work towards what we're wanting to gain, what we're wanting to achieve in the relationship. So just take a moment to listen to this as I read it out. You can close your eyes or you can just reflect and try and get as detailed as you can, because that's what's going to help this really sink into you physically as well as mentally. So close your eyes and picture your relationship 1 year from now. Imagine that it feels deeply connected, light, and fulfilling, not because circumstances have changed, but because you both began showing up differently. What does that look like? How do you communicate? How do you greet each other at the end of the day? How are you holding yourself in those times? Your body, how are you standing? What can you notice around you? What small habits have shifted? Now I want you to zoom back, and what is one thing you can start doing now that would make the biggest impact towards achieving that future in 1 year's time? What is stopping you from doing that today? So these little reality check corner segments can feel a little bit weird, but I feel like this practice of projecting forward helps us navigate the now. And we've talked about that when we're strategizing as a relationship, as a couple. Like having a strategy, having a vision, having a direction, having clarity about where you want to be really helps you now in terms of making steps towards that. And sometimes these situations can feel like you have no idea what step to take. So these little challenges are where our hope is that they help you think about that. Yeah. That brings us to the end of the episode, guys. Thanks for being here for these Reddits.
Good chat, guys.
Good chat, guys.
See you next week.